You ever walk into a place and feel the weight of history pressed down on you? Not the kind you read in books, but the kind that whispers from the shadows, that chills you to the bone? This isn't just an old house. It's a tomb where secrets were buried alive, and some things, once awakened, never truly sleep. Welcome to Atchison. Welcome to the Sallie House. The U-Haul groaned to a halt, a tired beast exhaling dust onto the quiet, tree-lined street of Atchison, Kansas. Sarah Miller, a pragmatic graphic designer whose optimism was usually her shield, stepped out, stretching limbs stiff from the long drive. Beside her, Tom, her husband, a software engineer whose ambition was matched only by his skepticism, was already on his phone, checking work emails. Their 6-year-old daughter, Lily, however, bounded out, her bright red sneakers hitting the worn sidewalk with joyful thuds. Her eyes, wide with wonder, were fixed on their new home. It was a grand old Victorian, all turrets and gables, painted a faded robin's egg blue with intricate white trim. It had character, history, and most importantly, space, a stark contrast to their cramped city apartment. For Sarah, it was a chance for a fresh start, a slower pace, a place where Lily could run free. For Tom, it was the perfect remote work setup, a quiet retreat where he could focus on his burgeoning career. It's like an old princess house, Lily declared, twirling on the overgrown lawn. Sarah smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through her. This was it, their new beginning. Local rumors, whispered by the real estate agent with a nervous chuckle, and later by a friendly but subtly uneasy neighbor named Mrs. Gable, painted the house as active. Sarah and Tom had dismissed it as quaint small-town folklore, the kind of charming eccentricity that came with buying a century-old home. They were city people. They believed in logic, not legends. The first few days were a blur of boxes and exhaustion. The house, while charming, possessed an unsettling quietness, a stillness that felt almost unnatural. Sarah attributed it to its age, its thick walls absorbing sound. But then the oddities began. A small, brightly colored plastic dinosaur, Lily's favorite, would inexplicably appear on the kitchen counter after being left in her bedroom. Sarah would find a faint whisper in the empty hallway, a sound like dry leaves skittering, but there was no breeze. A fleeting cold spot would pass through the living room, leaving goosebumps in its wake, even as the summer sun streamed through the windows. "Sally moved Mr. Dino?" Lily announced one afternoon, her eyes bright. "She likes to play with my toys when I'm sleeping." Sarah chuckled, ruffling Lily's hair. "Sally, is that your new imaginary friend, sweetie?" Lily nodded earnestly. Sarah and Tom exchanged a glance, a silent agreement to indulge their imaginative daughter. It was harmless. But then came the night Sarah woke to the unmistakable sound of Lily giggling in the hallway. It was a light, airy sound, full of childish delight. "Lily?" Sarah called out, sitting up. No answer. The giggling continued, faint but distinct, from just outside their bedroom door, followed by the soft, rhythmic thump-thump of a child bouncing a ball. Sarah slipped out of bed, her heart stirring with a mix of annoyance and curiosity. Lily knew she wasn't supposed to be up so late. She opened the bedroom door, peering into the shadowy hall. Empty. The giggling stopped. The bouncing stopped. Sarah frowned, then padded silently to Lily's room. The door was ajar. She pushed it open to find Lily sound asleep in her bed, tangled in her sheets, a soft snore escaping her lips. Sarah stared, a prickle of unease crawling up her spine. If Lily was in bed, then who ... She shook her head, blaming sleep deprivation and the creaks of an old house. Later that week, while unpacking a box of old family photographs in the dusty attic, Sarah's fingers brushed against something stiff and unfamiliar. Tucked beneath a stack of sepia-toned portraits of her great-grandparents, she found a single, very old, faded photograph. It wasn't theirs. It showed a young girl, unsettlingly similar to Lily in her delicate features and long, light hair, standing stiffly in front of this very house. But her eyes were completely black, devoid of pupils or irises, and her face was unnaturally pale, almost translucent. A chill that had nothing to do with the cool attic air ran down Sarah's spine. She flipped the photo over. Nothing. No name, no date. Just the unsettling image. She told herself it was an antique from the previous owners, perhaps a peculiar family portrait they'd left behind. But as she tucked it away, the girl's vacant, black eyes seemed to follow her, a silent, unblinking question in the depths of their darkness. The Sallie House, she was beginning to realize, held more than just charm. It held secrets. And it was slowly, subtly letting them out. The unsettling image of the girl with black eyes from the attic photo clung to Sarah like a cold shroud, even in the bright morning sun. It was a tangible piece of the house's strangeness, something her rational mind couldn't easily dismiss. She tried to push it aside, focusing on the mundane tasks of unpacking. But every creak of the old house, every distant whisper of the wind, seemed to hold a new, unsettling resonance. The oddities, once easily dismissed, now escalated with an unnerving frequency. A ceramic plate, placed securely on a high shelf, would suddenly shatter on the kitchen floor. Lights would flicker erratically, not just in one room, but throughout the house, as if an unseen hand was toying with the circuits. And the giggling. It was no longer just a faint sound. Sarah would hear distinct, childlike giggles echoing from empty rooms when Lily was clearly elsewhere, playing in the garden or engrossed in a cartoon. It was playful, yet chillingly disembodied. Lily, meanwhile, continued to talk about her new friend, Sallie, with increasing detail. "Sallie says she's sad, Mommy," Lily confided one afternoon, tracing patterns on the dusty floor. "And she doesn't like Daddy very much." Sarah's heart clenched. The mention of Tom, coupled with the escalating phenomena, sent a shiver of genuine fear through her. One evening, as Tom was hunched over his laptop in his study, the rhythmic creaking began. It was coming from Lily's room, the unmistakable sound of her antique rocking horse, a beloved heirloom from Sarah's grandmother. Creak, rock. Creak, rock. Sarah frowned. Lily was asleep, tucked in hours ago. She exchanged a worried glance with Tom, who, for once, looked up from his screen, a flicker of unease in his eyes. Sarah crept down the hall, her bare feet silent on the worn wooden floorboards. The creaking grew louder, more frantic, as she approached Lily's door. She pushed it open slowly, peering into the dim room. The rocking horse was still, utterly, unnervingly still. But as her eyes adjusted, she saw it. On the pristine wooden floor beside the rocking horse, clearly visible in the faint moonlight filtering through the window, was a small, child-sized handprint. It wasn't made of dirt or paint. It was made of what looked like fine, gray dust or ash, pressed firmly into the wood, as if a child had just stood there, reaching out. Sarah's breath hitched. She knelt, her fingers hovering inches above the print, then pulled back, a cold dread seeping into her bones. This wasn't an old house settling. This was something else. The escalating events finally pushed Sarah to action. She couldn't ignore Lily's stories or the unsettling occurrences any longer. Armed with her laptop and a growing sense of dread, she began to research the house's history, going beyond the pleasantries the real estate agent had offered. She delved into online archives, local historical societies, and old town records. It didn't take long to find the story of Sallie. Sallie was a young girl, about Lily's age, who had died in the house in the late 1800s. The official records were vague, citing a sudden illness, but local lore, found in old newspaper clippings and town gossip forums, hinted at something more tragic. The house had belonged to a doctor, and Sallie was supposedly his patient, undergoing an emergency appendectomy. The story went that something went wrong, and Sallie died on the operating table, right there in the house. The details were murky, but the tragedy was clear. A child had died here, violently and unexpectedly. Sarah felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling of being watched, even when alone in a room, the hairs on her neck prickling. She started experiencing vivid, unsettling dreams. She was a child again, trapped in a dark room, hearing hushed voices and the clinking of metal instruments. She'd wake in a cold sweat, the metallic tang of fear in her mouth, the dreams blurring the lines between historical fact and her own subconscious terror. Tom, however, remained stubbornly skeptical. "It's an old house, Sarah. It creaks. Lily has an active imagination, and you're stressing yourself out with all this research." His dismissiveness created a palpable tension between them, a chasm opening as Sarah felt increasingly isolated in her growing fear. Then came the scratch. Lily came downstairs for breakfast, her lower lip trembling. A thin, angry red line, fresh and raw, ran diagonally across her left cheek, just beneath her eye. Sarah gasped, rushing to her daughter. "Lily, what happened?" Tears welled in Lily's eyes. "Sallie got mad, Mommy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "She doesn't like it when I play with Daddy's things. She pushed me." Sarah's maternal instincts screamed. This wasn't a playground scrape. This was a deliberate mark. "Tom," she cried, her voice sharp with fear. Tom finally looked up from his phone, his eyes widening at the sight of Lily's face. He knelt, examining the scratch, his brow furrowing. "It's just a fall, honey. Maybe you scratched yourself on something." He tried to rationalize it, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. Sarah knew, with a terrifying certainty, that this was no accident. Sallie wasn't just a sad friend. She was becoming something else, something malevolent. And she was targeting them, starting with their daughter. Ever wonder what your kids are really talking to when they're playing alone? What if their imaginary friend isn't so imaginary? What if it's something that watches, that waits, that learns your weaknesses? Because in this house, Sallie isn't just a playmate. She's a puppet master, and your family is her favorite toy. The angry red scratch on Lily's cheek was a constant, burning accusation against Tom's stubborn skepticism. Sarah saw it every time she looked at her daughter, a stark reminder that something malevolent was at play, something Tom refused to acknowledge. The tension between them was a taut wire, humming with unspoken fear and frustration. Lily's connection with Sallie deepened with an unnerving intensity. She no longer just talked about her. She conversed with an unseen presence, her tiny voice echoing through empty rooms as she recounted elaborate games of hide-and-seek or tea parties. Sarah would often find Lily sitting alone, giggling, then whispering secrets to an empty space, her eyes wide and distant. "Sallie says you're being mean, Daddy," Lily would tell Tom, her voice strangely flat, devoid of her usual childish lilt, mirroring Sallie's supposed dislike. It was unsettling, a chilling echo of the unseen entity's influence. One afternoon, Sarah walked into Lily's room and found her meticulously arranging a tea party for her dolls. Lily was humming a strange, old-fashioned tune Sarah didn't recognize, a melody that sounded like it belonged to a forgotten nursery rhyme. On the miniature table, amidst plastic teacups, one tiny cup was filled with a murky, dark red liquid. "Sallie likes her tea special, Mommy," Lily announced, her eyes fixed on the empty chair opposite her. When Sarah, a knot forming in her stomach, reached for the cup to pour out the unsettling liquid, Lily shrieked, a raw, piercing sound that made Sarah recoil. "No, you're hurting Sallie. Don't touch her tea." Lily's face was contorted in a mask of pure fury, a look Sarah had never seen on her daughter before. It was a terrifying glimpse into the depth of Sallie's hold. The haunting began to subtly target Sarah and Tom, particularly Tom. His tools would vanish from his workbench, only to reappear in bizarre, impossible places, tucked inside a cereal box or balanced precariously on a high shelf. His computer, usually flawless, would glitch constantly, displaying corrupted files or freezing at critical moments. He'd experience sudden, sharp pains, like an invisible needle pricking his skin, or inexplicable cold spots that would follow him from room to room. He still tried to rationalize it, muttering about faulty wiring or old house quirks. But Sarah saw the flicker of fear in his eyes, the way he'd jump at shadows. His skepticism was fraying, thread by thread. One night, Tom woke with a gasp, his heart pounding. All the framed family photos on their bedroom nightstands, meticulously placed, were now turned face down. A chillingly cold breath ghosted across his neck, raising goosebumps on his arms. Then a faint, childish whisper, barely audible yet distinct, echoed directly into his ear. "Go away." Tom bolted upright, his eyes darting around the dark room, but there was nothing. Just the oppressive silence. He threw back the covers, his body trembling, the rational explanations dying on his lips. Lily, meanwhile, continued to describe Sallie in vivid detail. To Lily, Sallie was a pale, silent figure, sometimes playful, sometimes melancholic, but always present. Lily would point to an empty corner and say, "Sally's hiding there," or "Sallie wants to play with my dollies." This perspective, unseen by the parents, built a terrifying tension as the audience witnessed the growing intimacy between the living child and the unseen entity. One afternoon, Lily came running to Sarah, her face alight with excitement, clutching something in her tiny hands. "Look, Mommy, Sallie gave me a gift." Sarah looked down. It was a porcelain doll, antique and unnerving. Its once delicate features were marred by fine cracks, like a spiderweb across its face, and its painted eyes were unsettlingly wide, one of them chipped, giving it a vacant, unsettling stare. Its dress, a faded, once white lace, was stained with what looked like old, dried blood, a dark, rusty brown against the delicate fabric. It was clearly not one of Lily's dolls, nor anything they owned. "Sallie says it's her favorite," Lily chirped, hugging the doll tightly. Sarah felt a wave of nausea. This was a direct, undeniable manifestation, a physical object brought into their home by an unseen force. She tried to take the doll, but Lily clung to it with surprising strength, her innocent eyes suddenly hard, almost defiant. Sarah backed away, her mind reeling. The doll felt wrong, utterly wrong. It was a conduit, a piece of the house's dark history brought to life. And as she looked at its cracked, unsettling eyes, she couldn't shake the feeling that the doll, like Sallie, was watching them, always watching. The porcelain doll, with its cracked eyes and blood-stained dress, sat on Lily's dresser like a malevolent sentinel, a chilling physical manifestation of the unseen presence. Sarah couldn't bring herself to touch it, let alone remove it. Its very existence mocked her dwindling sense of control. Tom, his arm still bearing the faint, inexplicable scratches, was a ghost of his former skeptical self, his eyes constantly darting into shadows, his jaw perpetually clenched. The tension between them was a suffocating blanket, thick with unspoken fear. The house, it seemed, had grown tired of subtlety. The playful giggles that had once merely unnerved them now echoed with a cruel, mocking edge, sometimes morphing into a guttural, inhuman growl that vibrated through the very floorboards. Objects didn't just move, they were thrown with violent intent. A heavy antique vase shattered against the wall in the living room, narrowly missing Sarah. Doors slammed with deafening force, shaking the entire frame, seemingly on their own. The temperature drops became dramatic, localized pockets of icy air that stole their breath, leaving a palpable, bone-deep chill. The aggression, as Lily had warned, was now undeniably and primarily directed at Tom. One night, he woke with a strangled gasp, his heart hammering against his ribs. He couldn't move. A heavy, suffocating weight pressed down on his chest, pinning him to the bed. As his eyes struggled to adjust to the oppressive darkness, he saw it. a small, shadowy figure standing over him, its face obscured by the gloom. But he felt the sharp, stinging pain of multiple deep scratches appearing on his arm, as if by invisible claws. He screamed, a raw, terrified sound that tore from his throat, and the figure vanished, leaving him bleeding, gasping for air, his sheets stained with fresh crimson lines. Desperate, Sarah grabbed her phone, her fingers fumbling with the cold plastic. She had to call for help, for anyone. The line went dead with a click. Then, from the receiver pressed against her ear, a child's voice, cold and clear, whispered her name, Sarah. Sarah dropped the phone as if burned, the sound of it clattering on the floor, drowned out by the sudden, violent rattling of the knives in the kitchen block. Tom, meanwhile, had bolted from the bedroom, his face ashen, his broken arm throbbing. He rushed to the garage, determined to get them out, to escape this nightmare. He jammed the key into the ignition, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold it steady. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. He tried again, frantically turning the key, but it remained stubbornly silent. As he cursed, the heavy garage door, which he'd left ajar, slammed shut with a resounding crash, the automatic lock engaging with a final metallic click. They were trapped. A chilling, distorted giggle echoed from the attic directly above them, a sound that was undeniably Lily's, yet twisted with a malevolent glee. Then heavy, dragging footsteps began, slow and deliberate, moving across the attic floor, directly over their heads. It sounded like something large and heavy being pulled, scraping against the wood. Panic, cold and absolute, gripped them. The house was a cage. In a desperate, adrenaline-fueled attempt to find an alternate exit, Tom stumbled back into the main hall, his broken arm hanging uselessly. He was halfway down the grand staircase when an unseen force slammed into his back. He cried out, a choked gasp, and was propelled forward, tumbling head over heels down the ornate wooden steps, landing with a sickening thud at the bottom. A sharp, excruciating pain shot through his arm, a fresh agony on top of the old. He lay there dazed, his body screaming in protest. As Sarah screamed and rushed to his side, her gaze darted to the front door. Her blood ran cold. The heavy oak door, which she had meticulously locked from the inside, was now secured by a thick, rusted chain, wrapped multiple times around the doorknob and frame, locked from the outside. There was no way out. Then, a chilling sound echoed from the top of the staircase. It was Lily's voice, strangely flat, devoid of emotion, yet carrying a triumphant, cruel edge. Sallie told him to go away. Sarah looked up, her heart seizing in her chest. Lily stood at the top of the stairs, clutching the porcelain doll, its cracked eyes seeming to glow in the dim light. Her own eyes were wide, but in them, Sarah saw not her daughter's innocence, but a terrifying, knowing emptiness. This wasn't just a haunting. It was a war, and they were losing. The house had sealed them in, and the entity within was ready to play its final, horrifying game. Tom lay crumpled at the foot of the grand staircase, his arm bent at an unnatural angle, his face a mask of agony and disbelief. The front door, chained from the outside, mocked their desperate attempts at escape. And at the top of the stairs, Lily stood, clutching the porcelain doll, her voice flat, triumphant. Sallie told him to go away. She tore through old town archives, dusty microfiches, and obscure local history books, driven by a singular, terrifying purpose, to uncover the true history of Sallie and of this house. The official records of Sallie's death, the botched appendectomy, now felt like a flimsy veil over a deeper, darker truth. The words, spoken by her own daughter, were a fresh wound in Sarah's heart, colder than the icy air that now permeated the house. Sallie was indeed a victim, but not of a botched surgery. The doctor who had owned this house was not a healer. He was a monster, a serial killer who preyed on children, and Sallie was his first victim in this very house, her death covered up by the respectable facade of medical tragedy. Her voice, usually so calm, was a trembling whisper as she revealed a secret passed down through generations of her family. They weren't fighting a sad child ghost. They were fighting a sadistic, cunning killer, a malevolent entity that had haunted this house for over a century, feeding on innocence and despair. The Sallie House was not just a home. It was a hunting ground. And they, the Miller family, were the latest prey. The knowledge was empowering, but it was also a cold, crushing weight, for now they knew the true face of the monster, and it was far more terrifying than they could have ever imagined. My own sister, she vanished from this town decades ago, just a child. After she started talking about a new friend in the old doctor's house, my grandmother, she always said the doctor was not a good man, that he had a darkness in him, that he took children. We were too afraid to speak. The house, it protects its secrets. It protects him. She confessed that her ancestors knew the truth about the doctor, but were too terrified to speak, fearing the house's wrath, a wrath they had witnessed firsthand. The entity haunting their home was not Sallie's innocent spirit, but the malevolent, sadistic spirit of the doctor himself, who used Sallie's name as a cruel, innocent facade to lure and torment new victims, particularly fathers, to relive his heinous acts. Sallie's actual spirit, Sarah now understood, was likely trapped, a silent, terrified witness to his ongoing evil, perhaps even forced to participate in his sick games. She cross-referenced names, dates, and locations. The pattern was chilling. The scratches on Lily were not playing rough, but early signs of the doctor's aggression, using Sallie's name as a shield. Lily's chilling statement about Tom, Sallie told him to go away, was not Sallie speaking, but the doctor's influence, his malice filtering through their daughter. All the missing children had lived near the doctor's residence, the very house they now inhabited. She had to confirm it, to find someone, anyone, who knew. Despite the house's attempts to trap them, she found a moment of weakness, a brief flicker of cell service, a garage door that momentarily jammed open. She rushed to Mrs. Gable's house, pounding on the door, her face streaked with tears and grime. Tom's skepticism had finally shattered, replaced by a raw, primal terror that mirrored her own. In the dim, cobwebbed attic, behind a false wall, she discovered after noticing a peculiar draft, she found it. A hidden compartment. It was a small, dusty alcove, carefully concealed. Inside, she found not just more old records, but a disturbing collection of children's drawings. They were crude, unsettling sketches, all depicting the same figure. A tall, gaunt man with a menacing, almost predatory expression, looming over smaller, terrified child figures. His face, though roughly drawn, had a chilling familiarity, an echo of the doctor from Sallie's official story. Among the drawings, Sarah's fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. It was a crude, blood-stained surgical instrument, clearly not for an appendectomy, but something far more sinister, a tool designed for cutting, for inflicting pain. There was no denying it now, no rationalizing. The Sallie House was not merely old. It was alive, and it was malevolent. It had trapped them, injured Tom, and was actively twisting their daughter. Sarah's fear transmuted into a desperate, furious resolve. She had to understand. She had to fight. Leaving Tom to tend to his broken arm, Sarah launched herself into a frantic, obsessive search for answers. Hours bled into a blur of frantic research. Sarah found old newspaper clippings detailing other mysterious disappearances in Atchison during the late 1800s, particularly children. Her desperate search led her to the house's oldest, most forgotten corners. A horrifying realization dawned on Sarah, cold and absolute. Lily's playful interactions with Sallie were recontextualized into a terrifying new light. Overwhelmed by the horrific truth, Sarah knew she couldn't keep this to herself. Mrs. Gable, seeing Sarah's desperate state, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored her own suppressed fears, finally broke. The neighbor's confession was the final devastating piece of the puzzle. It confirmed Sarah's horrifying discoveries, solidifying the terrifying reality. The truth, when it finally settled, was a cold, crushing weight. The Sallie House wasn't just haunted. It was a hunting ground, a century-old trap laid by a sadistic killer who used the innocent name of a child to mask his monstrous deeds. Tom, his arm throbbing, his face pale with the terror that had finally eclipsed his skepticism, began to unravel. He moved through the house like a ghost, his eyes darting into every shadow, muttering to himself. Rooms would subtly shift their layout. A door that led to the kitchen moments ago might now open into a dark, unfamiliar closet. Hallways seemed to stretch, their ends receding into oppressive darkness. The house was not just a place. It was a psychological weapon, wielded by a malevolent entity that understood their fears, their love for Lily, and their desperate need for escape. The sounds of the house mimicked their deepest fears, the faint cries of children from unseen rooms, the dragging footsteps from the attic, growing louder, closer. She couldn't give up, not on Tom, and certainly not on Lily, who was slowly slipping away. She clutched the crude, blood-stained surgical instrument she'd found in the hidden compartment, a grim artifact of the doctor's evil. This wasn't a game. This was a fight for their lives, for their very souls. She had the truth now. She knew who or what they were up against, and that knowledge, terrifying as it was their only weapon. She began to formulate a desperate plan, piecing together fragments of Mrs. Gable's family history, the occult symbols she'd found in the doctor's drawings, and the chilling lore of banishment rituals. They couldn't run. They had to confront it. In this house, the only way out was through. The air became impossibly heavy, thick with a suffocating dread that made breathing a conscious, desperate effort. Grotesque faces, distorted by malice, seemed to bleed from the wallpaper, their painted eyes following Sarah as she moved, actively trying to drive her mad. He started trying to board up all the windows and doors, not to keep the entity out, but with a frantic desperation, muttering about keeping her in. She'd see fleeting visions of the doctor, his gaunt face distorted by a predatory smile, lurking in the shadows, always just at the edge of her vision. She'd hear the phantom screams of his past victims, a chorus of agony that resonated in her bones, making sleep impossible. Tom, already injured and mentally fragile, was bombarded by these same auditory hallucinations, driving him to the verge of a complete mental breakdown. He would sit huddled in a corner, rocking back and forth, whispering pleas to unseen children. Sarah watched him, a chilling realization dawning. He wasn't trying to protect them from the outside world. He was trying to trap the entity, and them, inside, as if the doctor's influence was already warping his mind, mirroring his own confinement of victims. Their once solid partnership fractured, replaced by a chasm of paranoia and distrust. Sarah stared at Tom, slumped and injured at the base of the stairs, and then at Lily, standing at the top, her eyes wide and unervingly empty. The neighbor's hushed confession, confirming the doctor's true nature, echoed in her mind, a terrifying validation of her worst fears. Their new beginning had become their living nightmare. The revelation, rather than bringing clarity, ignited a terrifying psychological siege within the family. Lily's behavior became truly disturbing. The innocent giggles were replaced by a chilling, old-fashioned tune she would hum, a melody that sounded plucked from a forgotten, macabre lullaby. Her eyes, often vacant, would sometimes take on a cold, calculating gleam, utterly unlike her own. One afternoon, Sarah found Lily in the kitchen, holding a butter knife, her gaze fixed on Tom. "Sallie says the bad man needs to sleep," Lily said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. Sarah had to physically restrain her own daughter, wrestling the knife away, her heart pounding with a horrifying fear that the doctor's malice was now actively flowing through Lily. The house itself became an active antagonist, a living entity determined to break them. Sarah experienced waking nightmares. They were trapped, isolated, and systematically being driven insane. But amidst the terror and the crumbling sanity, a desperate resolve ignited in Sarah. The crude, blood-stained surgical instrument felt impossibly heavy in Sarah's hand, a grim artifact of the doctor's evil. Tom, his face pale and drawn, his arms still throbbing, clung to a desperate hope, his mind teetering on the edge of collapse. Lily, humming her chilling, old-fashioned tune, her eyes occasionally flashing with an unnerving, calculating gleam, was a constant, terrifying reminder of the enemy within. The house, a living, breathing antagonist, pressed in on them, its walls bleeding grotesque faces, its very air thick with the screams of the doctor's past victims. There was no escape, only confrontation. Sarah had pieced together fragments of Mrs. Gable's family history, the occult symbol from the doctor's drawings, and the chilling lore of banishment rituals. The plan was desperate, born of terror and maternal instinct. They would confront the doctor's spirit in his own domain, the hidden room, now revealed as his operating theater and torture chamber. It was a place steeped in unimaginable suffering, the very heart of his malevolence. Armed with Mrs. Gable's ancestors' tarnished silver locket, a relic from a previous victim, imbued with generations of sorrow, and a faded, brittle photograph of the doctor, Sarah led Tom and Lily to the hidden passage. The air grew impossibly cold as they entered the small, enclosed space. The diorama of Thorne's death was still there, but now, in the flickering beam of Sarah's flashlight, it seemed to pulse with a dark, malevolent energy. The crude surgical instrument in her hand felt like a key, not to a lock, but to the doctor's enduring evil. "Ready?" Sarah whispered to Tom, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. He nodded, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and grim determination. Lily, strangely quiet, clutched her porcelain doll, her gaze fixed on the diorama. Sarah placed the locket and the doctor's photograph on the miniature operating table of the diorama. She began to chant the words of the banishment ritual, a guttural, ancient language she'd found hidden in Mrs. Gable's family lore, her voice trembling but resolute. Tom, despite his broken arm, gripped her free hand, lending his strength, his fear momentarily forgotten in their shared purpose. As Sarah's voice echoed through the small room, the doctor's spirit retaliated with a terrifying psychological onslaught. The air crackled with unseen energy. Illusions flickered before their eyes. Sarah saw Tom as a monstrous, abusive figure, his face contorted into the doctor's predatory smile, his hands reaching for Lily. Tom saw Sarah as a betrayer, her eyes cold and accusing, whispering that he was weak, a failure. Both were bombarded by the phantom screams of the doctor's past victims, a cacophony of agony that threatened to shatter their minds. The room spun, the walls bled, and grotesque faces writhed in the shadows, whispering dark suggestions, trying to turn them against each other, to break their resolve. Then, the entity turned its full, terrifying attention to Lily. Her body began to contort, her limbs twisting unnaturally. Her eyes rolled back, and her small frame convulsed. A chilling, guttural growl tore from her throat, followed by her own childish voice, distorted and desperate. "No, stop. He wants... Daddy!" The doctor's spirit was making a desperate, final attempt to fully possess Lily, to claim her as his ultimate vessel. "Lily!" Tom screamed, his eyes fixed on his daughter. He couldn't let it take her. Driven by a primal, paternal instinct, he lunged forward, pushing Sarah back, directly confronting the unseen force that gripped Lily. "Get out of her, you monster!" He roared, his voice raw with fury and despair. The entity shifted its focus to Tom, its full fury unleashed. The air around him shimmered, distorting. Sarah watched in horror as Tom's body was lifted, suspended in the air, then slammed repeatedly against the stone walls of the hidden room. He cried out, a series of broken gasps, his bones audibly cracking. His face contorted in agony, then surprise, as a deep, jagged gash, mirroring the crude surgical instrument Sarah held, appeared across his chest, bleeding profusely. He was being murdered, just like the doctor's victims, a gruesome reenactment of his own atrocities. As Tom's life ebbed, a profound, sorrowful light flickered in the room. A translucent, ethereal figure of a young girl, her face etched with a century of sadness, briefly materialized beside Tom's dying form. It was Sallie. Her eyes, filled with an ancient sorrow, met Sarah's. She pointed a trembling, spectral finger at the doctor's photograph on the diorama, then at Tom's bleeding chest, a silent confirmation of the killer's identity and his method. Then her lips moved, forming a single desperate word, unheard but felt in Sarah's very soul. Run. Tom's body hit the floor with a final, sickening thud, his eyes wide and unseeing. His sacrifice had created a momentary opening, a rupture in the malevolent energy that had held them captive. The doctor's spirit, momentarily distracted by Tom's death, recoiled, its hold on Lily loosening. "Lily, now!" Sarah screamed, grabbing her daughter's hand. Lily, limp and unresponsive, was dragged by Sarah through the hidden passage, out of the torture chamber, and into the main house. The screams of the phantom children returned, a chorus of rage and despair, but they were behind them now, growing fainter. The house still felt alive, but the immediate, suffocating pressure had lessened. They had survived, but at an unimaginable cost. Tom was gone, a final brutal sacrifice to the Sallie House. And the doctor's spirit, though wounded, was not banished. It was merely contained, for now, its malevolence still simmering within the walls, waiting for its next opportunity. The screams of the phantom children faded behind them, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the Sallie House. Sarah dragged Lily through the hidden passage, out of the torture chamber, and into the relative familiarity of the main house. Lily was limp, unresponsive, her small body a dead weight in Sarah's arms, but she was breathing. They had escaped, but Tom was gone, a final, brutal sacrifice to the house's insatiable hunger. The police, alerted by Mrs. Gable after Sarah's frantic call from a brief moment of restored cell service, arrived hours later. Sarah's account was a jumbled, hysterical narrative of a sadistic doctor, a malevolent spirit, and a husband's heroic, impossible death. They found Tom's body in the hidden room, the gruesome gash across his chest undeniable, but the official report would cite a tragic accident or unexplained trauma, unable to reconcile the impossible. Sarah and Lily were taken to a hospital, then released into the care of Sarah's bewildered sister, miles away from Atchison. The world outside the Sallie House felt alien, too bright, too loud. Sarah was no longer the pragmatic graphic designer. She was a widow, a survivor, her mind a shattered mosaic of terror and grief. Every shadow held a lurking threat. Every creak of her new, safe home sent a jolt of ice through her veins. The psychological scars were deep, raw, and unhealing. She saw Tom's face in her dreams, not as her loving husband, but as the contorted, agonized victim of the doctor's wrath. Lily, once a bright, imaginative child, was irrevocably changed. The spark in her eyes had dulled, replaced by a quiet, distant sadness. She rarely spoke, and when she did, her voice was often a whisper, as if she feared being overheard by unseen ears. She had recurring nightmares, waking in cold sweats, muttering about the bad man and Sallie's tea. Sarah would sometimes catch her humming the chilling, old-fashioned tune, a melody that made Sarah's blood run cold. Lily also developed an inexplicable aversion to men, particularly those who resembled her father, shrinking away from male figures with a quiet, profound fear. Sarah knew, with a mother's terrifying certainty, that a piece of the Sallie House, a trace of the doctor's malice, still clung to her daughter. The Sallie House, its reputation cemented as truly cursed, was abandoned. No one dared to live there again. Its windows stared out like vacant eyes. Its porch sagged, and its once charming facade crumbled, a physical manifestation of the evil festering within. The town of Atchison treated it as a forbidden zone, a place of profound evil, its secrets whispered only in hushed tones. Years passed. Sarah, a single mother haunted by loss and trauma, struggled to rebuild their lives. The memories of the Sallie House were a constant, aching presence, but she tried to move forward for Lily's sake. Finally, after years of trying, Sarah decided to sell the old house remotely, hoping to sever the last tangible link to their nightmare. She listed it, expecting it to sit on the market indefinitely, a notorious blight. To her surprise, an offer came quickly. A seemingly normal young couple with a small child. They were eager, almost too eager, to move in. Sarah felt a faint prickle of unease, but she dismissed it as lingering paranoia. She just wanted it gone. The paperwork arrived, thick with legal jargon. Sarah, numbly signing the final documents, glanced at the buyer's name, David Thomas Croft. Her hand froze. Croft, a name echoed in her mind, a chilling whisper from the depths of her research. Silas Croft, the cruel guard who had allowed Elias Thorne to die in Eastern State Penitentiary. No, that was the other house. But then, a detail from her deepest, most obsessive research of the Sallie House, a detail she had almost forgotten, resurfaced with terrifying clarity. The original doctor who owned the Sallie House, the serial killer who had preyed on children, had a rarely used, obscure middle name, a name that had only appeared in the most obscure town records. His full name was Dr. Alistair Croft Blackwood. David Thomas Croft. Sarah stared at the name on the deed, her blood turning to ice. A common last name, yes, but the middle name, it couldn't be a coincidence. The final shot is of the new family, smiling, unaware, as they move into the charming old Victorian. The young father, David, carries his small child, humming a soft, old-fashioned tune. As he steps over the threshold, a faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound emanates from beneath his fingernails as he grips the doorframe. And his eyes, for a fleeting moment, take on a cold, calculating gleam, utterly unlike his own. The horror had found a new, perhaps familial host. The Sallie House was not just a home. It was a legacy of evil, and the cycle of torment was about to begin anew for another unsuspecting family. And the question lingered, a chilling whisper on the wind. Was this just a new chapter, or had the doctor, through some dark, inherited connection, simply returned home?